The German shepherd stood at the edge of the porch with blood on her leg and a puppy in her mouth, and when Cole Barker pushed open the screen door, she took 3 careful steps forward, set the puppy on the frozen boards at his feet, and made a sound he would never forget, a low, cracking whine that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. Her eyes never left his. "Easy, girl," he whispered. She did not move. "Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one." The temperature that morning in Carter's Mill, Tennessee, was 22 degrees, and a thin white breath rose from the shepherd's mouth as she sat back on her haunches and waited. Cole crouched slowly, moving the way a man moves around a wounded thing he knows can still bite, and looked down at the small, trembling shape she had laid on his porch. A puppy, no older than 3 weeks, eyes still sealed shut, fur the color of wet straw, matted, streaked with something dark he did not want to look at too closely. He slid one weathered hand under the tiny body and lifted it, and it fit inside his palm the way a heart might fit inside a chest. It was still warm, barely. He looked up at the mother. She had not moved. She was watching him the way a person watches a judge, the way a person watches the last door in a long hallway of doors. He could see her ribs. He could see the swelling in her left hind leg, the fur matted with dried blood, where something had opened her skin and stayed open, angry and red and hot, days old at least. He could see the way she carried her weight forward, off that leg, and the way her tail lay flat against the boards, not tucked in fear, but simply spent, as if she had used up every last thing she had brought with her to reach this porch, to reach this stranger, to lay this puppy at his feet. "Where did you come from?" Cole said quietly, and the shepherd's ears flicked once and then settled, and she did not answer, because she could not. But her eyes told him what her voice could not, that she had come from somewhere far, and that she was not going any farther, and that whatever happened next was up to him. He unzipped the front of his old canvas jacket, tucked the puppy inside against the heat of his chest, and stood up slowly. "Come on, girl," he said. "Come inside. Just come inside." He did not reach for her. He knew better than to reach for her. He simply turned, held the screen door open with his shoulder, and waited. For a long moment she did not move, and Cole thought she was not going to, and something in his chest tightened at the idea that she had brought him this puppy and would now walk back into the trees to die alone. But then she stood, slowly, painfully. The bad leg buckled under her once, and she caught herself with a small choked sound, and Cole flinched but did not move to help her, because he understood that helping her right then would break something between them that she had spent everything to build. She took one step, then another. She reached the threshold, hesitated, looked up at him one more time, and then she crossed. She crossed into his house. And halfway across the kitchen floor, her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the linoleum in a heap of matted fur and dried blood. And she closed her eyes, and she did not open them again for a long time. Cole stood over her with the puppy against his chest and understood, in the way a man understands things without needing words for them, that his life had just changed. He was 58 years old that morning. He lived alone in a low white farmhouse at the end of Sawmill Road, 3 miles east of the Carter's Mill town line, on 11 acres of scrub oak and pasture that had belonged to his father before him and to his grandfather before that. He had been a lineman for the county power company for 31 years, before his back finally told him he was done. And now he ran a small repair shop out of his barn, fixing lawnmowers and chainsaws and the occasional old truck engine for people who could not afford the dealership in Sparta. He had been married once to a woman named Ruth, who had died of a stroke on a Thursday morning in April 7 years back, while she was watering the tomatoes on the back porch, and he had found her when he came in from checking the fence line. He had not remarried. He had not really tried. He had a black coffee pot that he ran twice a day, and a radio that stayed on the same country station year-round, and a rocking chair on the front porch, where he sat most evenings and watched the light go out of the hills. And if you had asked him, in the quiet hours before that morning, whether his life had room in it for anything more, he would have told you no, politely. But no, he was wrong. He set the puppy down inside a shoebox lined with an old wool sweater, tucked it beside the wood stove, and turned back to the shepherd on the floor. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. He could see the pulse at her throat. He knelt beside her, close enough to touch but not touching, and he spoke to her the way he had once spoken to horses when he was young and worked summers at the Hollins Ranch. Low, slow. Words that did not matter, the sound of a voice that did not want anything from her. "Good girl, easy now, good girl, I've got you, I've got you." Her ear flicked. She did not open her eyes, but her tail moved, just once, just the tip. He picked up the phone on the wall and called Dr. Ann Carey at the Carter's Mill Animal Clinic, and when she answered, he said, "Ann, it's Cole Barker. I need help. I need it now." 20 minutes later, he was easing his old pickup down the icy ruts of Sawmill Road, with the shepherd wrapped in a wool blanket on the passenger seat and the puppy tucked inside his jacket. And the shepherd was looking at him with eyes that had gone glassy, but that still somehow knew him. Cole could not have explained it if you had put him on a Bible, but he knew that she knew him. She had chosen him on a porch that morning, and now she was choosing to trust him. And it was the kind of thing that made a grown man's throat tight in a way that he did not have any use for. Dr. Ann Carey was 51 years old and had been the only large animal vet in a 15-mile radius since her father had retired 11 years earlier. She had known Cole Barker since they were both children at the Millbrook Elementary School, and she took one look at the shepherd on her steel table and said, "Cole, oh, Cole." And then she pulled on her gloves and she got to work. The infection, she told him an hour later, standing in the hallway with her mask hanging around her neck and her hands smelling of iodine, had reached the bone. There was a puncture in the joint of the left hind leg, something narrow and deep, maybe a wire, maybe a rusted nail. She could not tell yet, and it had gone untreated so long that the tissue around it had begun to die. The dog was severely dehydrated. She was carrying at least 12 pounds less than she should have been. Her heart was strong, but her fever was dangerously high, and she was going to need surgery, and she was going to need it in the next hour, and even then, Anne said, meeting his eyes, she had maybe a 48-hour window before the infection reached her bloodstream in a way that even antibiotics could not pull her back from. "How did she get to my porch?" Cole said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it, in that shape, carrying a puppy. How? Anne was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hands. "Cole," she said finally, "I've been doing this 30 years, and there are some animals, when they run out of options, when there's no other way, they make a decision. They pick a direction, they pick a person, and they walk. I've seen dogs travel farther than they had any business traveling, in worse shape than they had any business being alive in, because they had somewhere they had to get and someone they had to reach. I don't know how she got to your porch. I don't know how she carried that puppy that far, but I'll tell you this, she meant to. Every step of the way she meant to." Cole rubbed a hand across his mouth. He could still feel the warmth of the puppy against his ribs. Safe now in a padded incubator behind the frosted glass of the treatment room where a young tech named Grace was bottling formula into a syringe with the practiced calm of someone who did this every week. "How far?" he said. "Judging by her condition," Anne said, "and the fact that she's not from any address I recognize in the immediate stretch, and there's no chip in her that I could scan on a first pass, my guess would be 4 miles, maybe more. Somewhere east of the ridge. 4 miles. Cole let the number settle. 4 miles on a joint that was rotting from the inside out, in 22-degree weather. with a 3-week-old puppy in her mouth. He thought about the way she had waited on his porch, the way she had lowered the puppy at his feet, the way she had made that sound. "Save her," he said. Anne looked at him. "Cole, this isn't going to be cheap, and even if I do everything right, she may not." "Save her," he said again. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you have to do. Save her." Anne nodded once. She did not argue. She turned back toward the treatment room, and Cole sat down in the hard plastic chair in the waiting room, with his hands folded between his knees, and he did not move for 6 hours. He did not read the magazines. He did not turn on the little television bolted to the corner. He did not answer his phone when his neighbor Ruth Kessler called at 11:14 to ask if he wanted to come to the Wednesday potluck at the Baptist Hall. He sat and he listened to the ticking of the old wall clock, and he thought about a dog he had never met before that morning, a dog who had walked 4 miles on a broken leg with a puppy in her mouth to lay that puppy at his feet. And he thought about the way her eyes had looked up at him, and he thought about what it took in this world for anything to trust anything else that much. At 3:42 in the afternoon, the door to the back opened, and Anne Carey came out, pulling off her surgical cap, and Cole stood up before she had crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. Her eyes were tired. There was a small streak of something red across her forearm. "She made it through," Anne said. Cole opened his mouth to say something and could not, and he sat back down in the chair, and he put his face in his hands, and it was not exactly crying, but it was close. "She's not out of the woods," Anne said, sitting down beside him. "The next 72 hours are going to tell us. If the fever breaks, if she starts drinking on her own, if the tissue takes to the sutures, she has a chance, a real chance. But the leg is bad, Cole. Even if she pulls through, she's going to limp. She's going to limp the rest of her life." "That's fine," Cole said, still not lifting his face. "That's just fine." "The puppy," Anne said. "She's small, but she's fighting. Grace has her on the schedule, every 2 hours. We'll keep them both here overnight and see what the morning brings. You go home, get some sleep. There's nothing you can do here that we're not already doing." Cole nodded, but he did not get up. He sat there for another 20 minutes in the plastic chair, listening to the clock. Then he stood, and he pulled on his jacket, and he drove home on roads that had started to freeze over again in the failing light. And when he got to his kitchen, he stood a long time in front of the empty space by the wood stove where the shoebox with the wool sweater had been that morning. And he understood, for the first time in 7 years, that his house was too quiet. He named her Scout that night, not out loud, in his head, because she had found him, because she had known where to go when there was nowhere left to go. He named the puppy the next morning at the clinic, when Grace lifted her out of the incubator and set her in his hands, and he saw for the first time the 2 small smears of tan above her eyes that gave her the look of a creature already wearing a question. Hazel. Because his mother had had a hazel tree in the yard when he was a boy, and because it was a soft word, and because the puppy needed a soft word to grow into. Scout came home 11 days later. She came home on a Tuesday in early December, in the passenger seat of Cole's truck, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like clean cotton and disinfectant, with a plastic cone around her neck and a row of black sutures along the shaved patch on her hind leg and eyes that were still tired, but that were at last hers again. She walked into the house on 3 good legs, dragging the 4th. She limped straight past Cole, straight through the kitchen, and into the small mud room where Cole had set up a wire crate with Hazel inside on a heating pad. She pressed her nose through the wire. She lay down beside it. She did not move for an hour. Cole stood in the doorway watching them and thought about the morning 3 weeks earlier when a dog with a broken body and 1 puppy had walked to his porch and asked him, in the only language she had, to be worth trusting. He was glad he had been, but he still did not know where she had come from, and that was a question that, in a small town like Carter's Mill, was not going to sit quietly for long. It was Ruth Kessler who first said it out loud. Ruth was 72 years old, ran the little post office out of the front room of her house on Ridgeway, and knew, by long and disciplined habit, everyone's business for 6 counties in every direction. She stopped by on the Thursday after Scout came home, ostensibly with a tin of divinity fudge for the holidays, and she stood in Cole's kitchen with her coat still on and watched the German shepherd sleep on a folded quilt beside the wood stove, with the puppy tucked in the curl of her belly, and she said, "Cole Barker, where in the good Lord's name did you get that dog?" He told her. He told her about the porch and the puppy and the 4 miles Anne had estimated and the tattoo Anne had finally found on the inside of Scout's left ear, a faded string of letters and numbers that had been done by a professional some time ago, and that Anne had photographed and sent off to the State Kennel Registry to see if anyone could match it against a name. Ruth listened, and when he was done, she pulled off her gloves and set her tin of fudge on the counter, and she said, "Cole, 4 miles east of your porch is the Reddick place." Cole looked up. "The Reddick place," Ruth said again. "Old Marlon Reddick's farm, off Blackhawk Road. 900 acres of nothing but poor pasture and pine woods. You know the one." "I know the one," Cole said slowly. "But Marlon Reddick's been alone up there for years, since Beatrice passed. He never had dogs I ever heard of." "Marlon Reddick is dead," Ruth said. "Died 3 weeks ago Sunday, alone in his kitchen. They found him Wednesday morning when the propane man came out for the winter fill and saw the mail hadn't been touched. Heart, they said. No one to call. Poor man." She paused. "There was some talk about animals up at the property when they went to shut the house down. Nothing anybody moved fast on. You know how it goes. County was going to send somebody after the holidays." Cole set his coffee cup down very slowly. "Ruth," he said, "how many animals?" Ruth's face grew still. "I heard there were dogs. I heard there were more than a few. I don't know how many, Cole. I don't know how many made it." He drove out to the Reddick place the next morning. He did not tell Anne he was going. He did not tell Ruth. He put on his warmest coat and his heaviest boots, and he loaded a bag of dog food and 2 gallons of water and a stack of old towels into the bed of the truck, and he pointed the truck east on Blackhawk Road as the sun came up over the ridge. The gate at the entrance to the Reddick property was chained, but not locked. Someone had wrapped the chain through the bars in a lazy figure 8 and let it hang. Cole unwrapped it, pushed the gate open, drove through, and got out to close it behind him. The gravel drive wound uphill for nearly half a mile, through pines that closed in on both sides, and when it opened at the top, into a wide, flat clearing with a low white farmhouse and a sagging red barn and a pair of falling-down outbuildings, the silence hit him first. There should have been sound. In a place with animals, there was no sound. There was only the wind in the pines. He stopped the truck in front of the house and got out and stood a moment listening, and then, from the direction of the barn, he heard something, a single small whimper. Not a bark, a whimper. He walked toward it. Inside the barn, in the poor light that came through the gap in the loft doors, he found what was left of what had once been a whelping setup. A wooden pen in the far corner, a pile of old blankets, stiff with cold, 2 enamel water bowls, both empty and frozen through. A feed sack split, its contents scattered. And in the middle of the pen, lying on its side on the blankets, a single German shepherd puppy, maybe 5 weeks old, thin as paper, eyes open but glassy, breathing so shallow that Cole did not at first believe he was still breathing at all. Cole knelt beside him. He touched the small ribs. The puppy flinched weakly and made the whimper again, and Cole scooped him up as gently as he had ever scooped up anything in his life and tucked him inside his coat. Beside the pen, half covered by a fallen blanket, he found 3 small shapes that were not breathing. He did not look at them long. He covered them with the blanket, and he stood up and he walked out of the barn with the surviving puppy against his chest. At the door of the farmhouse he stopped. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open, and he stepped into a kitchen that was very cold and very still, and that smelled faintly of old coffee and older dust. There was a chair pushed back from a small table, and on the table there was a mug and a folded newspaper dated 3 weeks earlier, and, beside the newspaper, a spiral notebook open to a page that had a single line written in it, in a careful, slanted hand. Scout, front, west field, before dark, and then the pen, laid neatly beside the notebook, as if the writer had meant to come back and pick it up and had simply, quietly, not. Cole stood in that kitchen for a long time. He did not touch anything. He did not open any doors. He simply stood there in the cold, with the puppy warm against his chest and the notebook open on the table, and he tried to understand what he was looking at. Then he walked back out to his truck, laid the puppy on the passenger seat in a nest of towels, and drove straight to Anne Carey's clinic. He named the puppy Finn on the way there, because it seemed like the kind of name a boy that Small would need in order to survive the next 24 hours. He did not know yet, sitting behind the wheel of that truck on Blackhawk Road, that within a week he would have 2 more names to add to that list. He did not know yet how many puppies had already died. He did not know yet either that a woman he had never met was, that same morning, boarding a plane in Phoenix, Arizona, with a folder of papers in her carry-on bag and a rental car reservation for Nashville, and that within 72 hours she would be standing on his porch with her hand on her hip and her mouth in a hard line, and she would be telling him that Scout was hers. Her name was Emma Reddick. She was 41 years old. She was Marlon Reddick's only child, and she had not spoken to her father in 12 years. Anne Carey saved Finn. It took her 4 days of round-the-clock fluids and a subcutaneous line and formula every 90 minutes and a heating pad that Grace herself refused to leave the side of, but she saved him. And on the 5th day, when Cole came in to pick him up, Anne met him at the front desk with an expression he did not, at first, know how to read. "Someone called for you," she said, "this morning, about the shepherd." Cole's stomach did something small and cold. About Scout. Yes, about Scout. A woman. She said her name was Emma Reddick, and she said she was Marlon Reddick's daughter, and she said she had been notified by the county that a female shepherd and a puppy from her father's property had been taken in by a local resident, and she wanted to know where to come pick them up. Cole was very quiet. "Notified by the county," he said. "That's what she said." "By who at the county?" She didn't say. Cole rubbed a hand across his mouth. He had made no report. Anne had made no report. He had told exactly 3 people about Scout: Anne, Ruth Kessler, and Ruth's daughter-in-law Nancy, who worked at the feed store and had helped him pick out a proper crate. There was no county file. There was no report to be notified about. "What did you tell her, Anne?" "I told her I couldn't discuss anyone else's animals over the phone. I told her if she had questions about her father's estate, she needed to talk to the sheriff. I told her the shepherd's care had been assumed by a private party who had no intention of relinquishing her at this time, and then I hung up, and then I called Wade. Wade Halloran was the county sheriff. He was a heavy-set man of 64, with a slow way of talking and quick eyes, and he had known Cole Barker since they had been on the Millbrook Pee Wee baseball team together 50 years earlier. When Cole and Finn got home from the clinic that afternoon, Wade's cruiser was parked in the driveway, and Wade himself was sitting on the front porch with his hat on his knee and a manila folder in his lap. "Cole," he said, standing up as Cole climbed the porch steps with a small bundle in his arms. "That the newest one?" "That's Finn." "He gonna make it?" "Anne thinks so." Wade nodded. He looked past Cole into the house, where through the open front door the shape of Scout could be seen on her quilt by the stove, her head lifted, watching. Wade tipped his hat to her, gently, as if to a lady, and she watched him back and did not stir. "Cole," Wade said, "you got a minute?" They sat on the porch. Wade opened the folder. It was thin, 2 sheets of paper, a copy of a last will and testament dated 7 years earlier, in which Marlon Reddick had left his entire estate, the house, the 900 acres, all fixtures, all livestock, all personal property, to his only child, Emma Reddick of Phoenix, Arizona. And a second sheet, a photocopied page from the American Kennel Club's registration database listing a female German Shepherd, name Scout of Black Hawk Rise, tattoo number BHR 42-09, breeder of record Marlon Reddick, sole owner Marlon Reddick of Carter's Mill, Tennessee. "She called my office at 8 this morning," Wade said, "from the airport in Nashville. She has the paperwork, she has the will, she has the AKC. She is Marlon's legal next of kin, and legally right now that dog is her property, and so is that puppy of yours upstairs on your kitchen quilt, and so is the little fellow you just carried in the door." Cole was quiet. He looked out at the pasture in the fading light. The wind moved a little in the tall grass. "Wade," he said, "that dog walked 4 miles on a rotting leg with her puppy in her mouth to get away from that place." "I know it. And when we went back, there were 3 more in the barn that didn't make it." "I know it. And there was a notebook on the kitchen table with her name in it from the day Marlon died that said he was supposed to bring her in from the west field before dark, and he never did, because he was dead in that kitchen. And nobody came for those dogs for 3 weeks." Wade nodded slowly. He rubbed the flat of his palm along the crown of his hat. "Cole," he said, "I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm telling you what the law says. And the law says she is Emma Reddick's dog. Now, there are things we can do. I can call the district attorney. I can push for an animal welfare investigation on the Reddick property. If we can show a pattern of neglect, if we can show that the animals were left without provision, that's a case. But it takes time. And in the meantime, if she comes to your door with a sheriff's deputy and that folder in her hand, I can't stop her from taking that dog. You could stall her." Wade looked at him a long time. "I can stall her," he said. "Some, not forever, not much. Days, maybe a week. I can lose some paperwork. I can be slow returning her calls. I can be old and confused for a stretch. But there is a limit, Cole, and she is going to hit it." Cole nodded. He looked down at his hands. "When is she coming out here?" "She wants to come out tomorrow. I told her the roads were bad and she needed to give me 24 hours to arrange escort. That's the best I can do. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. "All right." Wade stood up. He tucked the folder under his arm. He paused at the top of the porch steps and looked back. "Cole," he said, "whatever you're thinking, don't do anything stupid. Don't hide her. Don't move her. Don't run. You do that, you make yourself the criminal, and then I can't help you at all. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." Wade drove off down Sawmill Road, and Cole sat on the porch a long time, watching the light drain out of the ridge. And then he went inside, and he sat on the floor beside Scout, and he put his hand very gently on the flat between her ears. And he said quietly, "We're going to figure this out, girl. We are going to figure this out." Scout closed her eyes. She leaned her head, very slightly, into the palm of his hand. Emma Reddick arrived at 2:11 the following afternoon, in a white rental sedan, with Tennessee plates and mud spatter up the fenders, and she did not knock on the front door. She walked around to the side of the house, where the mudroom window looked out onto the driveway, and she stood on tiptoe and looked in, and when she saw Scout lying on the quilt in the kitchen beyond, she rapped hard on the glass with the flat of her ring, twice, and she walked back around to the front, and she waited on the porch with her arms crossed. She was tall, taller than Cole had expected. She wore a wool coat that was a little too new for the weather, and boots that had never been walked in, and her hair was pulled back into a low knot at the base of her neck, and her mouth was set in the tight expression of someone who has already had the argument they are about to have in their head several times, and knows how it ends. Cole opened the door. "Miss Reddick." "Mr. Barker." She said his name the way a person names a difficulty. "The sheriff should be here any minute. I would prefer not to make this any harder than it needs to be. Come inside." She hesitated. She had not expected that. She had prepared for a fight on the porch. She stepped past him into the kitchen, and she stopped, and she looked at Scout, who was already on her feet, standing beside her quilt, ears forward, tail down but not tucked, watching. And Emma Reddick's face, for just a moment, did something that Cole caught and remembered and did not, at that moment, understand. She looked at the dog and her mouth softened, and her eyes went, not warm exactly, but far, somewhere else, and then it was gone, and her face was set again, and she was looking at Cole. "That's her," she said, "that's her. And the puppies. There are two." He gestured to the crate beside the stove where Hazel and Finn were curled together on the heating pad. Hazel notably larger now, Finn still a small and delicate weight against her side. "Two," Emma said flatly. "The paperwork says there should have been 6. "The paperwork was right," Cole said quietly. "There were 6. 3 didn't make it in the barn. 1 was with your father's dog when she came to me. She had walked 4 miles to get here. She walked out of that property carrying that puppy in her mouth, on a leg with an infection so bad that another 12 hours and she'd have been dead." Emma did not look at him. "And the reason," Cole said, "that she was in that shape and that those puppies were in that barn is that your father had been dead in his kitchen for 3 weeks with no one to look in on him, no one to feed the dogs, no one to bring her in from the West Field before dark, which was, from what I could tell, the last thing he ever wrote down on the last morning of his life." Emma's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to have this conversation with you, Mr. Barker. I know you're not. I'm here to collect my property. I know you are. Then let's do that." Cole was quiet a moment. He looked at her. He looked at her boots, which had never been walked in. He looked at her hand, which held the strap of an expensive leather bag, and had, he now noticed, a slight tremor in it. He looked back at her face. "Miss Reddick," he said, "what are you going to do with her?" Emma looked up. "That is not your concern." "It is my concern," Cole said evenly. "She walked to my porch. She laid that puppy at my feet. She is on my kitchen floor. What are you going to do with her?" For a long moment, Emma did not answer. Then she said, in a voice a shade too controlled, "There is a breeder in Knoxville who has expressed interest in Black Hawk Rise's remaining stock. She's a proven producer, even limping. Her line was my father's whole life. She'll go to someone who will breed her responsibly and place the puppies with proper homes, and she will have a good life. That is what I intend to do." Cole did not answer for a long time. Outside, somewhere down Sawmill Road, he could hear the low approach of Wade Halloran's cruiser, coming slow along the frozen ruts. "Miss Reddick," he said, "that dog has been bred twice, and she almost died the second time. She is skin over bones. She has a joint that will never carry her right. You put her in another litter, you're going to kill her. And I think somewhere in you, you already know that." Emma's face went a shade paler. She looked away. "That is not your decision to make." "No, ma'am, but I'm asking you to make a different one." Wade Halloran's cruiser pulled into the drive at that moment, and the front door was still open, and cold air was coming into the kitchen, and Scout was still on her feet, watching Emma Reddick with an expression that was not fear and was not aggression, but was, somehow, memory. And Emma Reddick, for the second time, looked at the dog, and her face did that same brief unraveling and resetting. And this time, Cole understood a piece of it that he had not before understood at all. She knew that dog, not from paperwork, not from AKC registration numbers. She knew that dog. Wade came up the porch steps with his hat off and his eyes tired, and he stopped in the doorway. "Miss Reddick," he said. "Cole, I hate every part of this. Let's get it done as fast as we can and hurt as little as we can." Emma nodded, once, tightly. She stepped forward toward the dog. Scout did not move, but her tail, which had been down but not tucked, very slightly, almost invisibly. Cole saw it, Wade saw it, Emma saw it. She stopped. "Come on then," Emma said quietly, more to herself than to the dog. "Come on, it's me. Come on." Scout did not move. "Come on," Emma said again, and her voice broke slightly on the second word, and then she said, "It's Emma, it's just Emma." Scout took one step backward. She lowered her head. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She simply, in the small and total way that dogs sometimes have, refused. Emma stood in the middle of Cole's kitchen with her hand out, and her hand fell to her side, and she said in a voice that no longer sounded like the voice that had been in the doorway, "She doesn't remember me." "Mom," Wade said gently. "Maybe she does." Emma looked at him sharply. She did not answer. She turned back to Cole. "I will be back," she said, "with a leash, and with a court order if I need one. On Monday. You have 4 days, Mr. Barker." She walked out. She got into her rental sedan. She drove off too fast, down the icy drive, and she was gone before Cole could think of a single thing to say to stop her. Wade stood a long moment in the doorway. He put his hat back on. "That was interesting," he said. "Yes." "Cole, yes. You saw it too." "I saw it. That dog knew her. That dog knew her." Wade rubbed his jaw. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "I don't know what I'm going to find out, but there's a story there, and I want to know it before Monday afternoon." He drove off. Cole stayed in the kitchen. Scout, after a long moment, lay back down on her quilt. She rested her chin on her paw, and she looked at Cole, and she watched him the way she had watched him on the porch that first morning, the way a person watches a judge, the way a person watches the last door in a long hallway of doors. "I know, girl," he said quietly. "I know." That evening, Ruth Kessler called. She had heard from her son, who worked at the courthouse in Sparta, that Marlon Reddick's estate had been quietly filed for probate 2 weeks after his death, faster than anyone in the county could remember an estate being filed, and that the executor of record was a Nashville attorney named Douglas Halbrook, whom nobody Ruth had spoken to had ever heard of before. She had also heard from her cousin Marjorie, who cleaned the pews at the Methodist church, where Marlon and Beatrice Reddick had been married 46 years earlier, that Marlon had cut Emma out of his will after Beatrice's funeral, and that everyone who had known him had assumed the estate would go to Beatrice's sister Vera, who had lived down the road and looked in on Marlon 2 evenings a week ever since. "So the will Wade showed you," Ruth said, "is 7 years old, Cole. Beatrice died 6 years ago. He wrote a newer one, and it did not go to that girl." Cole stood very still with the phone to his ear. "Ruth," he said, "how sure are you?" "I am as sure of it," Ruth said, "as I am of my own name. Marjorie was in the church office the day Marlon came to tell Pastor Denton about the change. She said he cried. She said he said his daughter had made her choices, and that was hers to live with, but the farm and the animals were going to somebody who would love them, and that was Vera. He wrote a new will, and now Vera is nowhere, and this daughter is at your kitchen door with paperwork from before the ink was dry on the old one." Cole thanked her and hung up and stood in his kitchen for a long time. Then he called Wade Halloran at home. Wade answered on the second ring. "I was about to call you," he said. "Vera Colton, Beatrice Reddick's sister. Marlon named her in a will he wrote 5.5 years ago, signed and witnessed, filed at the county clerk's office. I have a copy in front of me right now." "Then what is Douglas Halbrook doing with a 7-year-old will?" "That," Wade said, "is exactly the question. I have a call into him for tomorrow morning. I have another one into Vera, but nobody has answered at her number in 2 days. I sent a deputy out to her house. Nobody home. Front door locked. Newspaper stacked up. I don't like it, Cole. Something is not right." "Vera Colton is 70 years old," Cole said quietly. I know she is. Cole thought about it a long moment. He looked at Scout, curled on her quilt with the two puppies against her belly. He looked at the notebook page he had folded into his shirt pocket the day he had gone to the Reddick farm. Scout, front, Westfield, before dark, which he had not, until that moment, understood the full weight of. "Wade," he said, "you need to find Vera Colton." "I'm working on it." They did not find her that night. They did not find her the next day. What they found instead, on Sunday morning, was Douglas Halbrook's letter, delivered by overnight courier to Cole's front porch at 8:13 in a stiff white envelope with a Nashville return address, informing him formally that his continued possession of one female German Shepherd of Black Hawk Rieslein, registration BHR 42-09, together with 2 associated juvenile animals, constituted unlawful retention of estate property, and that failure to release said animals into the custody of Miss Emma Reddick, executors assign, by noon on Monday would result in the immediate filing of a civil suit for conversion and the pursuit of criminal charges for theft of livestock. Cole read the letter twice. He read it a third time. He set it on the kitchen table beside the notebook page. He picked up the phone. "Wade," he said, "come look at this." Wade came. He read the letter. He read it twice. He set it down. He said, "Cole, this is a threat. This is a fast, ugly, aggressive threat from a lawyer who has clearly been paid to move fast. Somebody wants this dog off your property before anybody has time to ask questions. And whatever the reason, it is not because a Knoxville breeder is offering good money for her." "No," Cole said, "it is not." Wade rubbed a hand down his face. "I have 24 hours, he said, to find Vera Colton, and I need to find her breathing, Cole, because if I find her any other way, this thing gets a great deal worse than a custody fight over a dog." He left. Cole sat at the table for a long time. Then he got up, he put on his jacket, he went out to the barn, and he did something he had not intended to do when the day began. He loaded Scout and the 2 puppies into the back of the truck. He did not run. He did not hide. He drove them instead 6 miles north on Sawmill Road to the little farmhouse of a woman named Pearl Whitaker, who had been his mother's best friend when he was a boy, and who had, at 83, more sense in her left hand than most people had in their whole lives. And he sat in her kitchen and he told her, in one long, slow, steady account, every last thing that had happened since the morning of the porch. When he was done, Pearl looked at him a long time over the rim of her teacup, and she said, "Cole Barker, that dog picked the right porch." "Pearl," he said, "I need to hide her just for a night, just so that when they come with a paper tomorrow, they don't find her at my house, and I have time to figure out what the truth of this thing really is. I know it's wrong. I know I could get in a world of trouble." "You are not going to get in a world of trouble," Pearl said, "because you are not going to hide her, Cole. You are going to leave her at your kitchen. You are going to be exactly where they can find you. But you are going to make sure that when Emma Reddick shows up at your front door tomorrow with her deputy and her lawyer, there is somebody else on that porch too. Somebody with a voice. Somebody who knows the story. I am going to make the calls. You go home." "Pearl, You go home, Cole Barker. That dog picked your porch. You're not going to fail her by hiding her in my barn." He went home. He put Scout and the puppies back on the quilt. He sat at the kitchen table and he stared at the notebook page and at the letter from Douglas Halbrook and at nothing at all. And then, sometime past midnight, without knowing he was going to do it, he picked up the phone and he called Ann Carey and he told her what he was going to try to do the next morning. And Ann was quiet a long time on the other end of the line. And then she said, "I'll be there at 11. I'll bring Grace." Wade called at 6:45 in the morning. His voice was strange. "We found Vera," he said. "She's alive." "Where?" "Nashville, in a facility, a memory care facility. She was admitted 3 weeks ago from her home, by a woman who signed the admission papers as Emma Reddick, next of kin. She is not next of kin, Cole. She is not any kin. She is Marlon's daughter. Vera was Beatrice's sister. There is no family relation. Wade. Vera does not have dementia, Wade said. She was assessed 3 months ago at Sparta General as fully competent. There is no medical basis for a memory care admission. Somebody moved her to Nashville, put her behind a locked door, forged a signature on the intake, and started the paperwork on Marlon's estate under a will that Marlon superseded 5.5 years ago. That is what we are looking at. That is what has happened. Cole closed his eyes. Where does that leave us? It leaves us, Wade said, with an attempt to defraud an estate, which is a felony, which I can prove, which I am on my way to Nashville right now to prove, which will take me, at a minimum, 2 days to formalize with a warrant. In the meantime, that girl is showing up at your porch at noon with a leash and a court paper that will, on its face, hold up, because we cannot get the fraud paperwork filed before she does. So you are going to have to hold that line, Cole, on your porch, by yourself, until I can get back. How am I going to do that? Wade was quiet a moment. Cole, he said, I have known you 50 years. If there is a man in this county who can hold a porch for 2 days against a woman with a court paper without breaking any law, without hiding an animal, without getting himself arrested, it is you. You are going to talk to her. You are going to tell her what we know. You are going to give her a chance to walk away. And if she does not, you are going to hold that porch anyway. Anne is coming. Pearl has made calls. There are going to be people there. That is the last thing that is legal. And it is the only thing that is going to work. He hung up. Cole sat at the table. Scout came over to him slowly, on her 3 good legs and her 1 bad one, and she pressed her flank against his knee, and she stayed there. And after a long moment, Cole put his hand on the flat of her head. Girl, he said, I don't know if I'm up to this. Scout leaned into him. They came at 11:42. They came in a small procession. Emma Reddick's white rental sedan first, then a county sheriff's cruiser driven by a young deputy Cole did not recognize, then, unexpectedly, a black town car with tinted windows, in which sat, as it would turn out, Douglas Halbrook himself, come up from Nashville to deliver the paperwork personally and see to it that the transfer went smoothly and quietly and without noise. They did not find quiet. They found, on the porch and in the yard of Cole Barker's small white farmhouse, 27 people. And Carrie was there in her clinic coat, with Grace beside her holding a laminated folder of Scout's medical records and a photograph printed the night before of the puppies who had not made it in the barn. Ruth Kessler was there in her blue Sunday coat with a folder of her own, containing a photocopy of Marlon Reddick's newer will and a signed statement from Pastor Denton of the Methodist Church confirming its existence. Pearl Whitaker was there on a folding chair Cole had set out for her, wrapped in a wool blanket with her hands folded in her lap. Sheriff Wade Halloran's second in command, a woman named Deputy Lila Reyes, was there in uniform, having driven down from her home in Sparta at 4 in the morning on Wade's orders. And there were 22 neighbors and townspeople standing in a loose crescent across the yard, most of them holding nothing at all, some of them holding coffee mugs, all of them looking, very calmly and very steadily, at the small procession pulling up the drive. Emma Reddick got out of her rental car. She stopped. She looked at the crescent. She looked at the porch. She looked at Cole, who was standing at the top of the porch steps with his hands in his coat pockets, and Scout beside him, upright, ears forward, not moving. Douglas Halbrook got out of the town car. He was a tall, thin man in a dark suit, and he took in the yard the way a man takes in a bill he did not expect. He walked to the base of the porch steps. He held up a folded document. "Mr. Barker," he said, "I have here a court order." "Mr. Halbrook," Cole said, "before you finish that sentence, I would like Miss Reddick to hear something." Halbrook stopped. He looked at Emma. Emma looked at Cole. She said, "Whatever it is, say it fast." Cole nodded once. "Vera Colton is in a memory care facility in Nashville," he said quietly. His voice was steady. It carried farther than he had expected it to. Every person in the yard heard it. "She was admitted 3 weeks ago on paperwork signed with the name Emma Reddick as next of kin. She is not your kin. She was Beatrice Reddick's sister. She had no dementia. She had a will in her favor, filed at the county courthouse in this county 5.5 years ago, naming her the sole heir of Marlon Reddick's estate, including this dog and every animal on that property. The sheriff of this county is, at this moment, in Nashville, obtaining a warrant based on the forged intake papers at that facility. When he gets back, whatever paper you are holding in your hand right now is going to be worth nothing." The yard was very quiet. Emma Reddick did not move. Douglas Halbrook was watching her very carefully. Cole saw his eyes move. "Miss Reddick," Cole said, "I don't know how much of this you knew. I don't know how much of this was Mr. Halbrook's idea and how much was yours, but I am going to tell you what I saw the first day I laid eyes on that dog. She was standing at the edge of my porch, on a leg that was rotting from the inside out, with a 3-week-old puppy in her mouth, and she had walked 4 miles in 22-degree weather to lay that puppy at my feet. And when we went back to the place she had come from, there were 3 more puppies in that barn that didn't make it because there was nobody there to feed them. And there was a page in a notebook on your father's kitchen table, in his handwriting, from the morning of the day he died, that said, 'Scout, front, Westfield, before dark.' He was on his way to bring her in. He died before he could, and she waited for him, for as long as she could wait, and then she made a decision, and she picked a direction, and she walked." Emma Reddick's face had gone very white. "Miss Reddick," Cole said, "your father cried the day he changed his will. He told his pastor his daughter had made her choices, and that was hers to live with, but the farm and the animals were going to somebody who would love them, which was Vera, whom you locked in a facility, so that you could sell his dog to a breeder in Knoxville. That was your choice, and that too is yours to live with." The yard was silent. Douglas Halbrook took 1 step backward. He said quietly, "Miss Reddick, I think we should return to Nashville." Emma Reddick did not answer him. She was looking at Scout. Scout was looking at her. And for the second time, Cole saw something happen in Emma Reddick's face, a small unraveling, this time slower, this time all the way through. Her mouth opened, it closed, it opened again. "She was my mother's dog," she said. Her voice was very small. "She was my mother's therapy dog. When the cancer was, she got Scout as a puppy. My father trained her. He trained her to lie on the bed with her. He trained her to bring my mother her pills in a little canvas pouch. He trained her to bark twice if my mother didn't wake up when she was napping. My mother named her Scout because she said Scout would always find her no matter where she went. And she did. She would find her in the yard. She would find her in the bathroom in the middle of the night. She would find her—" Emma stopped. She looked down at her hands. "She would find her." Cole did not speak. "When my mother died," Emma said, "I told my father I was moving to Phoenix and I was not coming back because there was nothing left in this town for me. And he told me that if I left, I would not have a father anymore either. And I said, fine. And I went. And I meant it. I meant it for 12 years. And then he died, and I got a call from a lawyer I had never heard of, and he told me there was a will, and there were animals, and there was an estate, and I could take it. I could just take it, and I did not have to come here to see any of it, and I did not have to see him, and I did not have to see her, and I did not—" She stopped again. She was crying now. It had come on her without her noticing. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and she looked up at the porch, at the dog on the porch, at the German shepherd with the limp and the sutured leg, and the two puppies inside the house behind her, and she said, "I did not want to see her because I knew she would remember me. I knew she would remember me, and I would remember my mother, and I would remember—" She could not finish the sentence. The wind moved once through the tall grass at the edge of the yard. Douglas Halbrook cleared his throat. "Miss Reddick, please, perhaps we should—" "Be quiet," Emma said. She did not turn her head. "Be quiet, Douglas, just be quiet." She took one step forward, toward the porch, toward the dog. Scout did not move. Cole did not move. Emma took another step and another, and she came to the bottom of the porch steps, and she stopped, and she knelt down, right there in the frozen mud in her wool coat and her boots that had never been walked in. And she said softly, "Scout, Scout, come here, girl. It's Emma. It's just Emma." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Scout stepped forward, once, twice. Slowly, on her limp, she came to the top of the porch steps. She lowered her head. She looked down at the woman kneeling in the mud, and she made a sound, low, quiet, half a whimper and half something else. And Emma Reddick reached out one hand, and Scout let it rest against the side of her face. And Emma Reddick closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the top of Scout's head, and she cried the way she had not, in 12 years, cried. The crescent of neighbors in the yard did not move. After a long time, Emma stood up. She turned to Douglas Halbrook. Her voice was steadier than her face. "You are fired," she said. "As of this moment." Halbrook opened his mouth. "Effective now," Emma said. "You will not file the order. You will not petition the court. You will return to Nashville. You will call the facility. You will begin today the paperwork to release Vera Colton from that place, and you will do it at your own expense, and you will do it under my supervision, and if you do not, I will make one telephone call to the State Bar of Tennessee, and you and I will find out together how long you keep the license on your wall. Are we clear?" Halbrook was very pale. "Miss Reddick, are we clear?" "We are clear." "Then go." He went. The town car pulled away down the drive, slow and careful. Emma Reddick turned to Cole. "Mr. Barker," she said. Her voice was very tired. "I don't have the right to ask you anything. I know that, but please, please keep her, keep them. My father would have wanted that. And I—" She stopped. "I did not deserve to have her. She knew that. She always knew that. She walked to your porch." Cole was quiet a moment. He came down the porch steps. He stood in front of her. He took off his hat. He said, "Miss Reddick, come inside. Come warm up. You've got a long drive back to Nashville, and there is somebody waiting for you there." She looked at him, startled. Then slowly she nodded, and she followed him up the porch steps, and Scout followed her, walking behind her, unhurried, quiet, the way a shadow walks behind a person. And the crescent of neighbors in the yard began quietly, one by one, to walk back to their trucks and their cars. And the young deputy in the sheriff's cruiser tipped his hat and pulled away, and Pearl Whitaker, on her folding chair, watched them all go, and then said softly to no one in particular, "That is exactly how a porch is supposed to be held." Wade Halloran came back the next evening. He came alone. He came into Cole's kitchen with a folder under his arm and a small, tired smile that Cole had not seen on him since the two of them were children. He sat down at the table. He opened the folder. "Vera Colton," he said, "walked out the front door of the memory care facility this morning at 11:10 in the company of the district attorney of this county and a nurse assigned to her by the state, on the arm, I might add, of one Emma Reddick, who signed the release paperwork herself. She's currently at her own house on Black Hawk Road, being fussed over by 3 of her neighbors and eating, when I left, her second bowl of chicken and dumplings. She sends her thanks. She would like to come and meet Scout when she's feeling stronger. She said, And this is a direct quote, Cole. She said to tell you that Marlon would have picked your porch too. Cole did not answer for a long moment. He looked down at his hands. What about Halbrook? Under investigation. He will not practice law again in this state. He's cooperating on some other things I am not at liberty to discuss with you right now, because your friend Ruth Kessler will have them all over the county by supper. Emma. Wade paused. Emma, he said, left Nashville 2 hours ago on a flight back to Phoenix. She left a signed statement with my office, relinquishing all claim to the animals of the Black Hawk Rise estate to their new owner, one Cole Barker, of Sawmill Road, Carter's Mill, Tennessee. She also left in an envelope $742, which she says is the balance of her savings account, and which she has requested go towards Scout's veterinary bills. And she left a letter. For you. He slid an envelope across the table. I did not read it. That's yours. Cole took the envelope. He set it on the table. He did not open it. Not yet. Wade, he said. Thank you. Cole, Wade said. That dog picked the right porch. I did what I did because I have known you 50 years, and I know what kind of a porch it is. Don't thank me. Thank her. He left. Cole sat at the table a long time with the envelope in front of him. Then he opened it. The letter was 3 pages. It was written in a careful, slanted hand that was not so different, Cole thought, from the hand in Marlon Reddick's notebook. It said, in part, my father was not perfect. I have spent 12 years being angry at him for not being perfect. When my mother was sick, he was strong in a way I could not be, and I resented him for that. When she died, he grieved by staying, and I grieved by leaving, and neither of us understood the other one's grief, and neither of us tried to. When Halbrook called me and told me there was an estate, I told myself I was going to take what I was owed, and I told myself Scout was just a dog. I told myself I did not remember her. I told myself I did not remember my mother's face when Scout put her head in her lap. I told myself the whole way here on the plane. I was not a good person on that plane, Mr. Barker. I am not sure yet what I am on the flight back, but I know that when I saw her on your porch, she knew me, and she should not have wanted anything to do with me, and she came to me anyway. That is not a thing I have earned. That is a gift she gave me. I do not know what I am going to do with it yet, but I am going to try to be someone who deserves the memory of it. Please tell her, if you can, that I said thank you. And please, please, when the puppies grow up, Hazel and Finn, the sheriff told me their names, please tell them that their mother was the bravest thing that has ever lived. Please, please. Emma Reddick. Cole folded the letter. He set it in a drawer of the small pine desk in the corner of the kitchen. He would keep it there the rest of his life. Scout came over to him quietly, on her 3 good legs and her 1 bad one. She pressed her flank against his knee. She looked up at him. Come on, girl, he said. Let's go check on those puppies. Winter turned. It turned the way winters turn in Tennessee, slowly at first and then all at once, a Wednesday in late January when the ice on the pasture pond went from solid to broken, a Sunday in early February when Cole heard the first cardinal at dawn from the roof of the barn, a warm rain in the 3rd week of that month that took the last of the frozen crust off the north field and left the ground soft and dark and smelling of things that were, again, alive. Scout gained weight. She gained the 12 pounds Anne Carey had put on the list, and then, over the course of 6 more weeks, 4 pounds beyond it. Her coat came in glossy and thick, black and rich brown along her back, cream at her throat and chest. The bad legs stayed bad. She would carry that limp the rest of her life. But she carried it well. She carried it the way a person carries a small, proud scar, without hiding it, and without apologizing for it, and she moved through Cole's house as if she had lived there always, as if there had never been a porch and a 4-mile walk, and a puppy laid at his feet in the freezing dawn. Hazel doubled in size, and then doubled again. She grew tall on legs that were, at first, hilariously too long for her body, and she developed an aggressively cheerful personality that expressed itself mostly in ambushes of Cole's boots, of the dust mop, of the trailing edge of the kitchen curtain, and once, memorably, of a raccoon who had made the tactical error of coming through the barn cat's door in the middle of the night, and who was chased back out of it with a great deal more noise than dignity. Finn, whose start in life had been the hardest, grew slower and quieter. He stayed a shade smaller than his sister. He shadowed Cole in a way that was so consistent and so devoted that Anne Carey, on one of her visits in April, took one look at him following Cole from the kitchen to the porch to the barn and back and said, "Cole, that is a service dog waiting to happen. If you have any interest, I know a woman in Chattanooga." Cole did not in the end send Finn to Chattanooga, but he trained him quietly, patiently, in the afternoons on the pasture. He taught him to sit, to stay, to come, to lie down, to leave it, to fetch, to release. He taught him to walk on the left, to heel at the porch step, to wait at the door. And once, on a warm evening in May, when Ruth Kessler had come by to drop off a jar of blackberry preserves, and had, without warning, gone very pale in the doorway and sat down abruptly on the porch bench with her hand pressed to her chest, Finn had, without being asked, come to her, put his head on her knee, and stayed there, still and calm, until the color came back into her face, and Ruth had said quietly, "Cole, Cole, that dog." And Cole had smiled and said nothing, and Ruth had gone home that evening with the preserves undelivered, and Finn had watched her car until it was out of sight down the road. Vera Colton came to visit in late March. She came in a pale green Chevrolet, driven by her neighbor Marjorie, and she walked slowly, with a cane, up the front walk to Cole's porch, and Cole came down the steps to meet her, and she took his hand in both of hers, and she said, "Mr. Barker, thank you for what you did for me, and thank you for what you did for Marlon's dog." And then Scout, who had been at the top of the porch, came down the steps, unhurried, and stopped in front of the small elderly woman, and stood very still, and looked up at her. And Vera Colton let go of Cole's hand and knelt, very carefully, and put her arms around Scout's neck, and Scout leaned into her, and Vera cried quietly for a long time into the thick, warm fur at Scout's throat. And Scout stood, patient and unmoving, and let her. They sat on the porch afterward all afternoon. Vera told Cole stories about Marlon, and about Beatrice, and about the summer Marlon had first brought Scout home as a puppy from a breeder in Kentucky, and about Beatrice's face when she had first held her, and about the year of Beatrice's illness, when Scout had learned to bring Beatrice her pill pouch, and to bark twice when Beatrice napped too long, and to lie on the foot of Beatrice's bed, with her head across Beatrice's ankles, because Beatrice's feet were always cold in the last months. Vera told him about the day of Beatrice's funeral, when Scout had walked, unleashed, at Marlon's side to the graveside, and had lain down on the packed earth beside the flowers, and had not moved for 4 hours. Vera told him that the West Field, the one in the notebook, was the field where Beatrice had liked to walk in the evenings, and that Marlon had taken to bringing Scout there, at the end of every day of every year since, to sit for a while and look at the light on the ridge, and that this, Vera thought, was what he had meant when he had written Scout, Front, West Field, before dark on the morning of the day he died. He had meant to take her there, one last time, before dark. And he had not made it, and Scout, who had loved him, had waited for him, for as long as she could wait. Cole sat on the porch and listened. He did not interrupt. He watched Scout, who had lain down at Vera's feet with her chin on her paws, and he thought about the morning of the porch, and he understood for the first time the full shape of what she had brought him. She had not brought him only a puppy, she had brought him a piece of a life, a piece of a family, a piece of a love that had lasted 46 years and had ended in a small, cold kitchen in a house up the ridge that nobody had come to for 3 weeks. She had carried all of that in her mouth, along with Hazel, for 4 miles in 22-degree weather. And she had laid all of it down at his feet on his porch on the coldest morning of the winter, and she had asked him, in the only language she had, to be worth trusting with the whole of it. He was glad again that he had been. There was one more piece of the story, and it came in the second week of June, in the form of a postcard from Phoenix, Arizona. It was addressed in a careful, slanted hand, and it had no return address, and it said, on the back, in 8 words, "I got a dog last week. Her name is Beatrice." Underneath, in smaller writing, in what was clearly a rushed afterthought, "Please tell Scout thank you. Emma." Cole read the postcard twice. Then he walked out to the porch. Scout was there, lying in the warm patch of sun by the top step, watching the light in the tall grass at the edge of the yard. Hazel and Finn were down at the fence line, engaged in what appeared to be a serious and important game involving a stick. Cole sat down beside Scout. He put his hand on the flat between her ears. "Girl," he said, "somebody wrote to say thank you." Scout closed her eyes. She leaned her head very slightly into the palm of his hand. The postcard went into the drawer of the pine desk, next to Emma's letter. Summer came. Ruth Kessler brought preserves. Ann Carey brought a new leash for Finn and a soft rubber ball for Hazel and a bottle of aged bourbon for Cole, that they cracked together on the back porch on the longest evening of the year. Wade Halloran retired at the end of July in a small ceremony at the courthouse in Sparta, and Deputy Lila Reyes took his place, and she came out to Cole's house afterward in her new hat and stood on the porch with Cole and looked at the 3 dogs in the yard and said, "That is the strangest, best story anybody in this county has told in 20 years, Mr. Barker." And Cole had said, "It is not my story, it is hers." And Lila had said, "Yes, sir, that is exactly what I mean." Fall came. Pearl Whitaker had a birthday. Cole took her a rocking chair he had rebuilt in his barn out of an old oak, one that had belonged to his mother, and Pearl sat in it on her porch and rocked slowly and said, "Cole Barker, this is the best chair I have ever sat in." And Cole had said, "You saved my life, Pearl." And Pearl had said, "No, honey, that dog did." Winter came around again. On a morning, in the first week of December, exactly 1 year after the morning of the porch, Cole opened his front door at first light. The temperature outside was 24 degrees. A thin white breath rose from his mouth in the cold. He stood a moment on the porch, and he looked out at the yard, at the ridge beyond, at the tall dead grass along the fence line, at the smoke from the chimney of Ruth Kessler's house half a mile down the road. And then he heard, behind him, the soft click of nails on the wooden floor. Scout came out onto the porch. She limped, as she had learned to limp, gracefully. She carried something in her mouth. She came to the top of the porch steps. She stopped. She looked up at Cole. Her eyes were bright. She lowered her head, and she set what she was carrying down at his feet. It was a stick. A very ordinary stick, about the length of his hand, peeled smooth by weather and time. She sat back on her haunches, and she looked up at him, and her tail moved once, at the tip, on the wooden boards of the porch. Behind her in the doorway, Hazel appeared, a full-grown shepherd now, with her mother's ears and her mother's chest and her father's bright, cheerful eyes. And behind Hazel, Finn, quieter, watchful, waiting to see what Cole would do. Cole crouched down. He picked up the stick. He turned it in his hand. "Girl," he said softly, "you brought me a stick." Scout's tail moved again. He understood then what she was doing. She was giving him something. Because a year ago on this porch, on this same wooden step, she had given him something else. A puppy in her mouth on the coldest morning of the winter, and it had been the thing that had changed both of their lives. And she remembered. Somehow, in the mysterious way that dogs remember, she remembered. And she had chosen this morning, of all mornings, to walk out onto this porch and lay something at his feet again. A smaller thing, an easier thing, a thing that meant only now that she trusted him, that she had trusted him and that she had been right to, that the porch had held. Cole reached out with his free hand. He put it on the flat between her ears. "Come on, girl," he said. "Come on, let's go inside. It's cold out here." Scout stood. She picked up the stick gently from his other hand, and she carried it back into the kitchen and dropped it on the quilt beside the wood stove. And Hazel and Finn followed her, and Cole stood alone on the porch for one more moment, and he looked at the ridge, and he looked at the light coming up over the pines, and he thought about a dog he had never met a year ago, who had walked 4 miles on a broken leg with her puppy in her mouth and had picked out of every porch in the county his. And he thought about what it took, in this world, for anything to trust anything else that much. And he understood at last, in a way he had not understood the year before, that trust was a thing you did not earn once. You earned it every morning. You earned it every time you opened the door. He went inside. He closed the door behind him. Scout was already lying on her quilt with the stick between her paws, and Hazel had her head against her mother's flank, and Finn had come to sit at Cole's feet, and the wood stove was warm, and the coffee was on. Outside, the sun rose the rest of the way over the ridge, and the light came in through the kitchen window and lay across the floor in a long, bright patch, and Scout closed her eyes and slept. If you have made it this far, thank you, truly. Stories like this one live or die by whether people take a moment to say they mattered. So if Scout's walk moved something in you, leave a comment and tell me the name of a dog who ever chose you. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you more stories like hers. And if you know somebody who has ever loved an animal the way Cole loved that dog on his porch, send this to them. It might be exactly the story they need to hear today.